Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Thursday, June 12th.
And this is the Playbook podcast. Good morning. Dasha, I have a question for you.
Oh, no.
Have you ever apologized to someone at 3 o'clock in the morning?
I probably should have. I probably have owed people apologies at 3 in the morning. So you know what? Respect.
I just think the most Elon Musk thing you could do, like what does an Elon Musk apology look like? Something I never thought we'd ever see, an Elon Musk apology. We finally saw one yesterday, but he had to do it at about 3:05 in the morning because that's what Elon Musk is like, right?
But you know what? He keeps Trump hours, so it's natural.
He does. What did you make of that? I didn't think that whole relationship would blow up quite to the extent that it did, so publicly and so visibly. And I certainly didn't think we'd see Elon Musk essentially publicly apologizing even in the dead of night. What did you make of that?
The fire started and was put out just about as quickly. It's...
Yeah.
I mean, look, Musk is still erratic and really disagrees and has continued to make some of these points with some of the policies of the Trump administration. So I don't know that we've seen the last spat between like Musk and Trump. And I think there are some people that aren't happy with the makeup here. I can really count many, actually, as I'm thinking about this in my head. But for now, they've made up.
I tell you, it hasn't made up. Musk and Scott Bessent. I was watching Bessent giving testimony on the Hill yesterday, and he looked gleeful when he was asked about Elon Musk. He couldn't help just throwing in a little jibe in there, something about preferring South Carolina to South Africa.
Well, he was asked about the physical fight, and he brushed that off. But I bet you he wanted to spill some tea. He was holding back.
All right, let's talk about the big stories driving the day. I can't believe it. It's been almost a week now since those first ICE raids in Los Angeles that kicked off this story. We are all still going to be talking about it through the day. The big moment today is happening later this afternoon when Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, gets his day in court. He will try and fight Donald Trump's decision to send in the troops to California in a courtroom. That will be happening at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time.
And that, by the way, has really been the best recourse for Democrats. That's been the go-to way to resist and to oppose, right?
Totally. So we'll all be watching that. We'll get into that as our main conversation in a minute. One of the other big things we're going to be talking about today, and I think it's the first time I will have said this in Donald Trump's presidency, is science policy. This morning, he will be signing some orders where he's going to be rolling back big, important vehicle emission laws in California.
Yeah, the Trump administration is making it very clear that they have zero interest in addressing issues of climate, in renewables. I interviewed the head of the Energy Dominance Council, which is a council that President Trump created. I interviewed Jared Agan earlier this week, and I asked about, some Republicans have talked about an all of the above energy approach, right? So yes, we want to keep fossil fuels, we want oil and gas, we want nuclear, but yeah, let's invest in solar and wind and geothermal. That is not the posture of this administration. They, in no uncertain terms, they made it very clear that it is fossil fuels, coal, and nuclear, and anything else is basically out the window. So that message continues to be hammered, and California is sort of the prime example of a green state that is pushing for all of these newer standards. And once again, the Trump administration is picking a fight there.
It reminds me always of the truism that Republican governments love state rights until they don't. We saw him, Donald Trump, announcing early regulations early in the week, rolling back some of Joe Biden's pollution era laws. And of course, in the so-called big, beautiful bill making its way through Congress, there is a big repealing of many of the investments in clean energy that Biden made. And that's obviously a huge story.
Yeah, there are some Republicans that aren't happy with that. I interviewed Senator Curtis as well at that same energy summit this week, and he is really trying to push to keep some of that stuff and bending the language in every which way he can to try to sort of detoxify the climate and the clean energy brand for Republicans, saying maybe if we talk about it in a different way. But, we have a beautiful planet. He's a senator from Utah that has some of the best public land in the country, and there's no reason why it needs to be partisan. Well, it is partisan.
It sure is. But of course, some of those Republican senators will know that there's big jobs in clean energy in their areas.
Right.
And that will no doubt be motivating some of them to talk about it. The big, beautiful bill, of course, will be a running storyline today. I'm amused to see that basically everyone on the Hill is headed over to the White House this evening, Dasha, for the Congressional picnic.
Except Rand Paul.
Everyone except Rand Paul. It wasn't that sad. They took his invitation away and said his grandson couldn't come because he's not been helpful enough on this bill.
Uninvited. You know that A little Alanis Morissette.
I do. And I'm sure it'll be ringing in his ears. He sounded a bit miffed about it, I have to say, when he was talking about it yesterday afternoon.
You don't like to be left out. All your friends are going.
All your friends are going, and they will no doubt get to hear Donald Trump address them on the South Lawn saying, time for unity, time to back this beautiful bill, time for us all to get together. But I suspect we're going to have many more weeks of arguing before we get to that point.
Oh, yeah. Grab your popcorn. We got a while.
One other thing I just wanted to flag is just to be on people's radar, really. We saw the US pull out a lot of its diplomatic people out of Iraq yesterday, very abruptly. And the suggestion seems to be that they did that because there may be something about to happen in the region. And Donald Trump sort of hinted at that when he was asked about it last night. CBS News reporting that Israel are poised to launch some sort of attack on Iran. We don't know if that's going to happen, but obviously if it does happen, it is going to be a massive story.
That's exactly right. I mean, this is something that has been on the back burner, but been watched by all of us for a while and could completely change our news cycle here.
Give us something else to obsess over next week. And of course, we were kind of expecting the US to do a deal with Iran. It looks like that's a lot less likely now over their nuclear program. And that being the case, suddenly violence becomes more likely. So one to watch. Let's talk about the main story that we've been talking about all week, Dasha, which is the events in LA and the way Donald Trump has reacted to that. As I said earlier, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has his day in court today. He is arguing, and the Californian government is arguing, that essentially what Donald Trump has done is overreach. The way that he's using or proposing to use these troops is beyond the extent of the law and what's permitted in terms of the military being used in domestic matters. And that is going to be heard by a judge this afternoon. And the judge in this case is a well-known name in legal circuits, Breyer, not Stephen Breyer, the Supreme Court justice who retired in 2022 after nearly 30 years, but his brother, Charles Breyer, who was another Bill Clinton nominee. And I guess seeing a relatively liberal judge on the bench for this might give Newsom some succor than it might get a result today, Dasha.
Yeah, and certainly will invoke the wrath of the White House, who has already been crusading against what they're calling the tyranny of the judiciary, which, let's be clear, it's working the way it's supposed to. And Democrats have really used that as their main avenue for fighting President Trump. Now, in some cases, they've prevailed. In some cases, they have not. And in a lot of these cases, we're going to end up seeing the final answer in the Supreme Court.
It's a fascinating moment, this case, for exactly the reason that you say. You know, Donald Trump has tried to push everything, every power that he has at his disposal as far as he can since January the 20th. And really the only check and balance on him doing that has proved to be the courts as we've moved through different areas of policy. We're now at the military area of policy, if I can put it in that rather simplistic way. And today we will find out whether the courts are prepared to step in on this as well, because if they don't, and this is deemed to be well within the president's powers, then I guess there's a reasonable chance that we may see military deployed in other cities around the US as protests grow or as other protests break out in the months ahead.
And there's still a big question about whether President Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act, because right now, technically, these military members can't be arresting people without that. It seems like some of that is in a gray area at the moment. There are still a lot of questions with how this plays out very practically, but I do think we are watching this political foiling of characters happening here, right? When you see Gavin Newsom and you see Donald Trump trying to be polar opposite characters in this clash, and both, I think, in a sense, actually helping each other politically with their bases in this moment.
You bet. The moment now coming towards us, Dasha, as well, of course, is this big military parade in DC on Saturday, now only a couple of days away. And it's amazing timing that this is coming just as we've seen Donald Trump deploy the military domestically for the first time. And it really puts a different spin on it, doesn't it?
It changes the context in a big way. And this was planned long before anyone knew what was going to break out in Los Angeles. And the irony of that moment of the celebratory military show of force versus this sort of hammer and fist military show of force. That juxtaposition is going to be really remarkable. And I'm curious to see what Democrats do with it. I spoke to a close ally of the White House when some of the polling was starting to come out. I think there was a YouGov poll, right, that showed people weren't really as on board with this as maybe the White House was claiming. And I sent it to a couple of people, and the response I got was, wait till we make the ads, wait for the political campaign here. And that's what the Republicans are thinking. I wonder how Democrats are going to use this moment. And I've gotten the sense that Gavin Newsom stepping in here as sort of this voice filling the void and the resistance has been a relief to Democrats to just see somebody out there vocally and coherently resisting, even as the White House thinks that this is playing into their hands and they're ultimately going to be successful. I think it's going to be a hindsight 2020 for one or the other.
People do often see these things in primary colors, right? They just see the image on the screen and they see this guy sticking up for it and this guy not. And that's all they take away from it. And I'm sure that's what the White House believes is going to happen. Having said that, as we've said earlier on the podcast, right, you put troops into these positions, you don't know how it's going to play out. So far, it's been relatively calm in LA since the troops turned up, but you can imagine a very different scenario where the whole thing looks like a total catastrophe and it's on the president at that point.
Yeah, exactly right.
Should we talk about something lighter? Should we talk about Les Misérables?
Let's talk about Les Misérables.
Are you a fan of the musical theatre, Dasha?
Oh, of course. I mean, I Dreamed a Dream is my song from Les Mis. There was a time when it was on my own. I went back and forth between the two. But when Trump was asked yesterday whether he sees himself as a Jean Valjean or as a Javert, and he said, that's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, this is everything a theater kid could possibly ask for.
I was getting wonderful text updates from the Kennedy Center last night from our colleague, Megan Messley, who got the ticket to go down and watch.
She got the hardship assignment.
She got to watch Donald Trump watching Les Mis. And it's from the updates she was sending, it sounds like half the cabinet was there. J.D. Vance and Usher were there, Pam Bondi were there, loads and loads of them turned out for this thing to show their support for the president. I have to say, the video she sent me from his arrival, I was wondering if Trump was really going to get the Vance treatment. We saw J.D. Vance get booed something rotten at the Kennedy Center a few months ago. Most people were kind of cheering for Donald Trump. There were the USA chants going. There were a few boos, but honestly, if I was him, I'd have been pretty happy with that.
Yeah, bit of a mix. I think that people probably knew that it was the president coming. And so whether you like him or not, and if you want to make a statement, you're turning up that night. But it's one of his favorite musicals. So I'm very curious to see what his review is about this.
And that's all for today's Playbook podcast. We've got much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, Dasha.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a great Thursday.